Welcome to the Film Florida podcast. I'm John Lux, and I'm the Executive Director of Film Florida. Before we get to our interview, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the Film Florida podcast. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.23 for our 2023 fundraising campaign. We also have a Film Florida merchandise page. Visit filmflorida.creator-spring.com to purchase Film Florida t-shirts, sweatshirts, coffee mugs, and more. Pete Zuccarini is a cinematographer and second unit director or assistant director. He's most known for his underwater cinematography on films like Life of Pi, Avatar: The Way of the Water, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, multiple Pirates of the Caribbean films, Dolphin Tale, and Dolphin Tale 2, just to name a few. Pete talks about his career, the extensive training, safety concerns, and challenges involved in being an underwater cinematographer, favorite projects and experiences, and more on this episode of the Film Florida podcast. Here's my conversation with Pete Zuccarini. Welcome to the Film Florida podcast, Pete.
Hello, John.
So let's start with your origin story. Where'd you come from?
I grew up on Key Biscayne, Florida, which is an island connected to Miami through a causeway system. And when I was a young kid, the island was a lot less developed than it is now, meaning there was a lot of open space. In fact, there was a lot of undeveloped land on Biscayne Bay that my friends and I would go and literally walk the seawall and look for wildlife. Schools of parrotfish, an obstruction that might have a big grouper in it, and we would fish from the shore and dive from the shore. And it's hard to imagine it now because it's just like packed with mansions that look out onto the Miami skyline, but that was sort of our playground as a kid. And growing up on an island in the summertime when it was super hot here, we spent all of our time in the water. Even before my early childhood, in my formative years, like in my toddler years, my mother joined a bunch of mothers, and the beach club here was like our nursery ground. So we would go to the beach and shake out the seaweed and collect the critters and watch them like a little aquarium for an hour, and then let them go back in the water. And had a lot of, I think, impactful moments during those years. You know, the first time I ever collected a group of sea creatures, and then I had a sargassum fish and some shrimp and some fish. And I came back from getting some more seaweed, and I looked, and my sargassum fish had eaten all the creatures in my little aquarium. I have these little memories that sort of sparked probably my curiosity in the sea, not the least of which is just snorkeling from shore and having my first encounters with stingrays and barracudas and sharks and things like that at a very young age, which I think, sparked a lot of curiosity about the ocean for me.
Well, that certainly answers the question of how did you find your interest in water, but how did you go from that to just general production? I mean, was there a step between, where you wanted to go with a career or a job in the underwater stuff, or did you just dive right into the water and start taking pictures?
No, there are definitely a few steps towards how I went from, that childhood towards working in the water. One critical step was that I wanted to have an underwater camera because all of my friends and we were going out lobstering and spearfishing, and I very quickly realized I didn't want to spend all of my time in the water like throwing animals into the boat. I was much more interested in watching them behave and seeing the corals. And so I approached my father for help getting an underwater camera. And his answer to me was, well, first, how much is it? And I told him the cost and that I was interested in getting a camera and scuba gear. And, he felt it was way too much cost to help me with it. So he bought me a lawnmower and said, you can mow our lawn with a lawnmower, but you can go out in the neighborhood and mow everyone else's lawn and figure out how to make the money you want to buy all this stuff. So that was sort of an immediate incentive to sort of solve my own problems, I think. But surprisingly, that worked pretty quickly. I was able to make a fair amount of money. Even back then, this is back in the 70s, I could make about $20 alone, which, took less than an hour. So I was able to chip away at that cost pretty quickly. But so I had an underwater still camera. I was going out all the time, taking pictures around the island. And interestingly, a lot of the photographs I took are of things that literally don't exist anymore, like something called Worm Rock Reef, which you can find as close as Stewart, Florida, but doesn't really exist down here in South Florida anymore. And then after I got interested in still photography, my father was a bit of a home movie fanatic. So we had a lot of Super 8 equipment around the house, including some primitive editing equipment for splicing. And so my brother and I, would have fun doing things like making time lapses in the road, like pretending we were racing cars, sitting on our butts, racing in the road. And we would get pressure cleaning equipment and do simulated hurricane scenes in our backyard. So we were a bit of a, home movie creators at a very young age. So that was all just for fun. And then when I went to university, I started studying at Brown University, an aquatic biology course of study. And then I took on a whim a photography course at Rhode Island School of Design, which we were allowed to do cross registration with from Brown. And I really enjoyed that photography class, and then took an introductory film class in the art department at Brown. And then after those two classes, I changed course from science to art degree. And school went from long nights and studying and a grind to feeling like I was having the most fun of my life, staying up till 4 a.m, working on photography assignments and making short films with my classmates. And I really got excited about filmmaking in school.
Wow. Okay.
And when I graduated school, it wasn't a film school, so to speak, like an NYU or USC or, real industry school. I was able to fulfill the production requirements of a fine art degree, but through film and photography at Brown and Rhode Island School of Design. Then when I got out of school, I continued working with one of my professors as a director of photography on a film called The Great Invisible, which was a story about a woman who traveled the Sahara Desert disguised as a male Bedouin. The true story about, I think The Sheltering Sky, the Paul Bowles film, is based on the same character, but it was not a water project. We were filming in Morocco and Algeria, out in the deserts. I was working as a cinematographer. And then I went back to New York to work on that film and some other films. This is right out of school. And I sort of hit a wall of missing the water, working on this film and working in New York. And I just decided I had to go home and get back closer to my water roots, and then trying to figure out how to make a living around that and in the film business. So I started working as a camera assistant on motion pictures. I was working as a underwater cameraman in like news and documentary. And I went over to the Bimini Biological Field Station where Dr. Sonny Gruber, who recently passed away in 2019, he was the foremost authority on sharks at the time, going back now. This is in the early 80s. And he had a lot of crews coming through. Anytime there was a shark story, he would be consulted. And I went on a camera team there, sort of as an assistant to the main camera person, and somehow got the attention of Dr. Gruber that I was very comfortable swimming around sharks, which was from my childhood growing up. We had a lot of sharks back in those days. And when we went out lobstering and spearfishing and taking pictures, we always saw sharks. So I had a pretty good understanding of Bahamas and Florida shark species and which ones you could move around comfortably and how to move around them comfortably. And so he invited me. He said, look, I have these film crews coming here all the time, and they usually don't want to get in the water, surprisingly, or they bring someone who's scuba certified and says he's going to get in the water, but then sort of doesn't get what he thinks could be produced from those situations.
Mm-hmm.
So like, a tiger shark is biting on the side of the boat while they're taking samples, blood samples, and measuring it. And he's saying, get in the water and get the shot, and they're saying, we don't really need this shot.
Yeah.
So I became this sort of shark photographer for this scientist for a while. He said, even if they don't want to hire you, I'm going to bring you over and we'll sell them the shots, which I did for a few years with him, either getting hired by these, BBC, Nat Geo news companies, people who were coming over, and I was either working as a underwater cameraman for them or as a supplementary underwater camera. And then that allowed me to build up a demonstration reel, because that's sort of and this is back in the film days too, where it was quite expensive
Yeah.
to just go out and shoot and build up and show what you could do. If you didn't have a regular job yet, film was very costly. So I was able to build up a substantial underwater reel from that, and then I was able to convert into starting to shoot some commercials. Miami was a little bit more active back then, in the wake of Miami Vice having been very successful.
Right.
So we had a very accomplished local film crew at that time. We also had a lot of European catalog shooting and commercial shooting in the fashion industry. So there was a fair amount of going on in Miami at the time. And so I was able to get commercials and build up a more artistic side of my reel, not just sharks. And then I got a call kind of out of the blue from a producer working for Disney saying that I had been recommended to direct a shark film for their new series. They were going to revive originally a series that Roy Disney directed many of the episodes, called Disney's True Life Adventures,
Okay.
which actually, when Roy Disney directed them, they were shown on the big screen. It was his first work, and he was actually spearheading this project as sort of a nostalgic interest in getting Disney back into wildlife. And so I was able to get that job directing this shark film. And while I was doing that, I pitched an Everglades film, an alligator story, and I was awarded that project as well. And then that put me out in the Everglades for about almost 2 years on a mother alligator, an alligator hole out in the Fakahatchee Strand, watching what turned out to be 3 generations of babies over the 2.5 years.
Mm.
And all the things that went in and out of that alligator hole, the mother defending the babies, things attacking the babies, the mother chasing the bigger babies out when they became dangerous to her new babies. And that was the story that I was fortunate enough to tell another local interest of mine. So I thought I was on a path towards being a wildlife filmmaker, but some opportunities came up to shoot some IMAX films underwater. And then that got me a connection that got me to shoot a few scenes for some films. And I had some friends from school that were sort of young producers that knew what my interests were. And I was able to work on a film called The Motorcycle Diaries, the Walter Salas film down in the Amazon in Peru. And that was a friend of mine from school that she was producing that film. And she said, my director wants to shoot the actors swimming across the real Amazon water location that Che Guevara swam when he had a sort of moment where he decided to become a person of the people and swim from a party to a leper colony and start his sort of life of serving people. And the director was insistent that Gael swim across the actual place where Che swam in the Amazon. And the local people had a lot of safety concerns, not the least of which was a lot of superstitions about that part of the river and that you couldn't be in the water there.
Yeah.
And because I had, at this point, a bunch of wildlife filmmaking under my belt and a lot of wildlife experts around me, I sort of made a couple phone calls to a doctor I knew had worked in Peru. And he gave me a few warnings about some things I needed to do, like wash my body with denatured alcohol to get rid of this snail that would leave eggs that could get into your body. And my friend that I had made 2 alligator films with at that time told me, reminded me how to, look for the drag outs for possible caimans or crocs or things. So I went into that environment pretty comfortable, having done a bunch of wildlife, and became one of the more memorable scenes I worked on in my life, because it was international crews from Italy, from France. They had picked up a bunch of South American crews because the story was about his motorcycle ride from Argentina all the way to the top of South America. So they picked up crews along the way. That sort of cemented my interest in being a water specialist, I would say.
Yeah.
I was already loving the water, but motion picture, how would you be a specialist? And I realized that, there really was a niche for people who were comfortable to operate safely, to guide actors safely. And then through my IMAX contact, having worked on an IMAX film shooting, I got introduced to Derek Walsky, who was the DP of Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one.
Mm-hmm.
DP'd all three of them. And they invited me to do the underwater work on that film, Pirates One, which then led to sort of, it's hard to break into the sort of larger scale format industry,
Yep.
like where you have big actors, high dollars on the line for performance. And so I sort of got lucky on that connection and delivering on that. And then that translated into me getting considered to be the director and cinematographer of the underwater unit of like a teen treasure hunting film called Into the Blue
Okay.
with Paul Walker and Jessica Alba. And then that film was exceptionally good for me because it had such a range of opportunity for different kinds of water shooting, water split level shooting, dialogue on top of the water with people while they're swimming, deep submerged wreck artifacts. There was an airplane set positioned 50 feet underwater at a location with sharks around it. And it had, large scale, great wide angle lighting opportunities and, delicate close-ups on people's eyes that we could craft interesting lighting and really beautiful shallow depth of field underwater. And so it really was a film that allowed me to experiment and explore, what we could do with those film cameras in those days. And that film wasn't particularly successful in the box office for whatever reasons. It did have a pretty long life on video, even maybe to this day, and caught the eye of some filmmakers, James Cameron included, of being able to showcase different ways of moving the camera, different ways of using light underwater, and definitely led to a lot of opportunity for me over time.
Well, I want to get into some of the other films that you've done a little bit more recently, but let me ask a question about the, safety and certification of that. I mean, it's one thing to just have some experience, but are there specific courses or certifications that you have to maintain in order to be a certified underwater DP?
Yes, that's a very good question. Now that our industry's very global, the certifications are different in different countries. In the United States, it's actually the least stringent requirements of all of the entire world, which is strange.
Mm-hmm.
But you just have to be a certified diver. Now, to be legal to do it and to be good at it and safe, are a different conversation.
Yep.
I mean, by the time I got involved with underwater filming, and like many aspiring underwater cinematographers, you're already obsessed with being a good diver. I grew up as a free diver first, which is, breath hold diving, because everything we did was holding our breath. But then to do photography and work, I did formal scuba training and got all the way up through being a technical dive master and gas blending and deep diving. And of course, you have to have all of your rescue certifications and CPR, all of that has to remain up to date. Working abroad, it's a little more stringent. You actually have to be licensed as a commercial diver to work in the UK or Australia, New Zealand, most European countries, in fact. And that is a considerably more difficult license to have and maintain. The license it's the same diver you would need to be an underwater welder,
Mm.
And to work, as a hard hat diver. And that's actually, if you were to just go out cold and take that license, it would, could take you a month at an intensive vocational school and, maybe $30,000. But there were some ways for me to do that using some of my more advanced licenses and do some training with a commercial certifying agency to sort of get credit for things I'd already learned through my advanced certifications and then shorten that loop a little bit. But still, And to be a commercial diver, you have to renew that license every 5 years, and you have to have a physical to make sure your heart and lungs and your body is capable to dive. At my age, I actually have to have that every year.
Mm,
I think earlier it was every 2 years, but you hit a certain age and you have to do it every year. So I have to do the same thing someone who works full time in the water has to do to be able to work abroad. But having said all that, that's like those are licenses that are required to be legal, but the skills that benefit you to be a good underwater cinematographer aren't necessarily taught. Some are taught. I mean, in a cave diving course where you're really taught to be careful about how you use, your different finning methods to not stir up the bottom are invaluable, to know how to move around in the water and operate safely and not disturb lion weight sediment that could ruin a film scene.
right. Now you mentioned your time on Pirates. You've been also on a number of really recognizable other films like Life of Pi, Avatar: The Way of the Water, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, among a handful of others. Do you have a favorite on-set experience from some of these more well-known productions you've been a part of?
That's a question that I've been asked before, and there's experiences that you have that are extraordinarily rewarding and joyful because of a collaborative epiphany or success or mind melding with a fellow filmmaker. And then there's things that were actually quite miserable to get through, but you worked with your team to solve problems and weathered the storm of unpredictable errors and surprises and disappointments from your director to come out the other side. So I I would almost want to give two answers to that. So maybe one of the most rewarding challenges that I overcame was on Life of Pi, when Ang Lee was very insistent because there was a lot of beautiful, painterly fantasy visual effects going to be integrated in that film to tell that story the way he wanted to tell it, that he wanted, when we were doing emotionally charged scenes up close in actors' faces, he wanted those scenes to be exceptionally vivid and real. And how that manifested itself is that he didn't want short takes. He wanted, when we were in the actor's face, Suraj, the primary actor that played the boy Pi, he wanted scenes to go like unedited for it more than a minute at times on his face as he went through the arcs of a scene. And that's particularly challenging in this one scene where he's asleep with his family below deck in this ship that's traveling across the sea, as with all of these animals that they're going to move their zoo and they're going to take it across the ocean. So all of the wildlife are in the ship, his family are in the ship, and he hears a loud noise. He goes above deck and sees there's at first an invigorating rainstorm, and then that quickly changes from exciting and invigorating to realizing the boat might be at risk for sinking. And there's waves washing people overboard, and a sort of look comes over his face of sheer terror that, oh my God, the boat's going to sink and my family is asleep and all the animals are asleep below deck. And so he races through the door and he has to navigate 3 flights of stairs, which are now midway through. That's going to be submerged because the boat is sinking. So we had a waterproof 3D camera with a volumetric displacement weight of something like 160 pounds. So it's a 160-pound camera that we want to travel at full speed down 3 flights of stairs, winding, and then go underwater and come back up and go back under and go through a door.
Wow.
And he didn't want any cuts. So we built this beautiful, the art department built and designed an incredible set. We moved through it and we realized we can't follow a boy at full speed through 3 flights of stairs with a 160-pound camera. And there was no compromise here. There's no, we'll use the small camera for this. we'll cut where we need to so we can do a move with a crane for part and, different ways. So my grip team and I came up with a way to support the camera with a cable and bungee system from above, which is great for one flight of stairs. But so we went back to the art department, the grip team and I, and we had them rebuild the set. So it was like, and this was interestingly inspired by having gone shopping around for some souvenirs and we were together at a store in Taiwan looking at those boxes that open with certain tricks. So you press on a wall and that opens one thing and then that opens. And we were sort of inspired by that we would basically turn this giant set into like one of those boxes that would come apart as we move through it. So we supported this 160-pound camera from above. And then the first flight of stairs, we put on a hinge and it swung out of the way so that the support cable could be unimpeded towards the next flight of stairs. When I took my next step off that flight of stairs, it literally flew away.
Wow.
So one hinged away, the next flew away. We took the set apart as I moved through it so that we could continue with this weight supported by the cable from above. Then when it hit the water, we had to have a 160-pound camera that was going to be able to travel forward underwater after someone's swimming, and then come up and do a water level shot in this turbulence, and then go back underwater. But to float a 160-pound camera and have a nice water level shot with seeing the actor's face at the right level, we had to have buoyancy for the camera.
Right.
We had a bladder system rigged onto the camera so that it could be buoyant when it did the above water shot, but we needed to be able to get it underwater, and we wouldn't be able to like inflate it or deflate it rapidly enough. So we had to leave it supercharged with buoyancy. So we put a sailing track on the bottom of the floor of the corridor set. And so when the camera hits the water after the last flight of stairs, a grip is hiding underwater, hooks to the bottom of the camera. We pull on a pulley system, we pull the camera underwater, and then we pull it forward on the sailing track to travel the buoy swimming, and then we release this sailing shiv equipment so that it could be allowed to float. Then I have it in my hands and can swim it, and then I swim it 5 feet, and then it pulls back underwater through the pulley system and travels the rest of the way. And so it was extremely complicated, but the only way we could figure out how to get this to be all one take. And we had just sort of, we're taking baby steps through it. The first flight of stairs hinges away. The second flight of stairs flies away. The grip hooks on, we pull it under, we travel forward, we go back up. And we're sort of walking through it baby steps. And Aang hears that we've like, the AD or whoever sort of told Aang over on the other set that we had a way to make it work. And he said, okay, I'm coming over. I want to do it now. And we were just like walking through it. Like, and he comes immediately when we just sort of had proof of concept walkthrough and says, I want to do it now. So we do it. The first take, incredibly too slow. We're afraid, for, heavy equipment, the safety of it. We're working through that still. And then he says, I want it faster. So now we're doing it sort of at a jogging pace. He says, I want it faster. And when I say faster, I mean a boy going as fast as he can down 3 flights of stairs to save his family's life. And then when he hits the bottom flight, he dives in like swim race style.
Yeah.
And I tell the stunt coordinator, Charlie Crowell, I say, Charlie, we have this 160-pound wrecking ball of a camera. We can now go faster. We figured out how to make everything go faster. I can make this, the grip team is up for the task. I have to just dive in with the camera. Everything is ready, but if he falls or trips or slows down, the camera's going to just bowl him over. And then they had a clear-eyed conversation about the risks, and he just went through it full speed. We went through it full speed. We hit the water. Everything worked. We come up, and also, mind you, when we come back up, we have to leave room for a digital zebra to come through, and all these animals, that have to be positioned that are going to come floating through the water. And we do the third take. We do it as fast as we can. And I come back up, and between each take, I'm getting notes from Aang, which were mostly faster, faster, faster. And when I come up from the water looking for Aang, and he's not there, I say, like, what are the notes? And they said, we'll check with Aang. And they're like, a minute goes by. We where what did Aang have to say? We don't know. He left the building. He was just moved on to the next set.
Oh,
He was very stoic director, and he got the shot after the third take, after we worked for, I don't think, 7 days to rebuild that set so we could get that one shot and have it be a 90-second shot that went, down the stairs and in and out of the water, and then that was it. We got it.
wow.
I didn't talk to him about it until the cast and crew screening, maybe a year, 9 months later.
Wow. Wow. Now, we had you on during an episode of our Film Florida Friday, which is our professional development series that we do each month. And you mentioned a 4-year process for underwater filmmaking with James Cameron in Avatar: The Way of the Water. The film was unique with its performance capture technology and underwater scenes. Can you touch a little bit on the prep work, the filming process, what it was like to achieve that final look? Because that's not something that you just jump in the water and you have it. Talk a little bit about that prep.
Interesting that you use the word prep in the question, because that's apropos. Jim had worked on that script for years before he finally, he and John Landau put that film into production mode, and he had a lot of very ambitious things he wanted to do with the performance. What's called motion capture, I think Jim sort of coined the term performance capture,
Mm-hmm.
because he didn't just want the motion of the actors to be captured. He wanted the performance, including the facial performances,
Right.
while doing these motions, to be part of that process. And he wanted the physics of the water to be correct. So he wanted to ensure that if someone was riding a creature, or, there were several different kinds of creatures that people would either swim with or ride on or ride with during battle scenes, during hunting scenes, during fun scenes. And so he wanted to have the performance capture cameras see exactly what would happen to the muscles, to the skin, how it would wobble, to the acting underwater with the eyes while the skin is wobbling. Everything wanted to be correct with the physics. And we had these accelerometer devices put all over their bodies, which measure how fast body parts are moving in relation to one another, that don't need to be filmed with the machine cameras that help with the performance capture. And so we went out into the ocean with these mechanical versions of the creatures, some to simulate the tulkun, the whale-like creatures, the elu, all these different creatures had different ways of moving. Some had long necks, some had powerful bodies. So we were towing some mechanical things that also required a second stunt person to drive, to operate the planing wings, to simulate the way they would bank and descend and ascend at the rates. So the rates were quite fast for some of these things, which necessitated the stunt team to be accomplished freedivers. In fact, some even world-class competitive freedivers. And it was a combination of devices, from towed planing simulated mechanical creatures to also some modified something people were using at tourist resorts, like jet-powered things that could jump in and out of the water with
Mm-hmm.
hydrojet propulsion. We modified some of those devices to serve as creatures. And then we went out into the water off of San Pedro Harbor first. And then to get better water, we went to Catalina Island. And then the concept kept improving. The creatures were being modified. The stunt team was, Garrett Warren, the stunt coordinator, was making some adjustments in how he thought they should perform. Jim was giving notes to Garrett about modifying those performances. And then I think Jim Cameron got to a point where he had seen enough that he liked what was going on and said, okay, now I want to go to really clear water and really test it. So we took all this equipment to the Bahamas so we could see better while we were doing these preparatory tests. And Jim was directing us through different actions of the creatures, different actions of the actor performers on the creatures. And I had to capture it, all of it, with this high-speed underwater propulsion device with a camera mounted to it. Charlie Arneson, who was sort of one of Jim's right-hand men at the time, a great diver, used to work on a live aboard dive boats, and then at the time he was James Cameron's helicopter pilot. So he was a man of many tasks, and he and I were the two camera people flying around on these high-speed devices, tracking and recording for Jim all of his directed modifications to the creatures and the movements, because he wasn't just directing the actors and the stunt performers. He was directing the special effects team and how to modify, and the stunt team were involved too, because there were a lot of safety implications to any modifications. So stunt riggers, special effects team, and Garrett Warren, the stunt coordinator, and second unit director as well, all modifying the creatures to Jim's taste. And I think that some of it was collecting data and pixels that may or may not be useful down the road. A lot of it was for Jim to really just zero in on how these creatures were going to move and how the actors were going to interact with the creatures.
Yeah.
And I want to sort of go back to what I said about, we're talking about ascent rates that were very rapid, nothing you could do on scuba safely. So all of it had to be done. And by scuba, I mean even rebreathers, which would be bubble free, you would never be able to ascend at those rates and not kill yourself.
Oh.
So all of it had to be done with accomplished breath holding. The camera team, the stunt team, the driver of the creature, everyone were accomplished freedivers. One of our freedivers actually on the team recently has beaten 2 of the American national freediving records. That's how good the freedivers were, literally the best freedivers in the country.
Yeah.
And Kurt Crack, who was in charge of training the actors and helping improve even the great freedivers so that we could operate as a team safely. And Kirk literally wrote the first handbooks on freediving certifications. And he really did a good job of having everyone be on the same page in terms of what our safety protocols were. Everyone was trained in how to rescue a freediver safely, how to recognize symptoms of someone who might need to be rescued. Everyone was using the same methods so that you could count on that team if there was any problems. So it was a very well-oiled machine before we got to the tank. And what happened was, to get the control of the light and have the machine cameras involved for the performance capture, and have a place where we could do blue screen and merge performance capture with real photography of actors, a purpose-built tank was built in Manhattan Beach Studios that was approximately 100 feet long by about, say, 60 feet across, and 30 feet deep at its deepest, and with windows for the special recording both through the windows. And we had a team of performance capture cameras in the water to optimize all the angles for the machine cameras to bring this underwater volume, so to speak, into the digital world for the visual effects team to work their magic. And on top of that performance capture, with the reference balls on the body and the dots on the face to capture every nuance to the facial expressions, we had GoPros attached to the performers to get consistent locations on those facial. Jim also wanted high resolution imagery from 3 positions of his choice for every scene where he knew he might cut to those angles. The performance capture is remarkable because they could sort of see the performance from any angle in post if need be, but he had sort of 3 angles, that were likely to be used that he'd wanted. So we had 4K, even up to 8K cameras on those faces. So if someone winced, or elated and made an eye expression, I wouldn't say that they put our shots directly into the film, but the visual effects team would be able to study in incredibly vivid detail anything that happened on those faces during the performance capture to make sure that if they got a great performance, and they did, that they would be able to represent it in those animated characters as it was performed,
Hmm.
not invented on the computer.
Now, one thing I'm always fascinated with underwater photography in films is the lighting, because what people forget is it gets dark really fast when you go underwater. And you guys are going, some pretty significant depths a lot of times. Talk about the importance of the lighting when it comes to doing underwater photography or in cinematography.
In general,
Yeah.
sure. Well, there's a lot of differences in lighting underwater from above water. But there are also some similar principles which still come into play. So some important things to keep in mind with underwater lighting is that water, even when it's clear, it has a much higher density, has a lot more things suspended in it, and it operates kind of like diffusion
Hmm.
does, like a light diffusion for above water sets. So a hard source will lose its intensity, and it will broaden out, and it will become softer over distance. It will change in color over distance. So light passing through water will filter out reds all the way through yellows, red to yellow. Warmer colors are all filtered out as the light travels through water. And there's a lot of ways of studying this if you're doing tests, with color charts at different depths. But then even at depth, you can bring back color by bringing, full CRI color spectrum light underwater, and you can bring back that color. So this is a interesting quandary that people are put in is, they want their scenes to look like they're underwater, but they also don't want to lose good skin tones. The natural thing to happen underwater will be for you to lose warmth. And so the skin's going to go greenish blue, which, makes people look corpse-like or dead.
Right. Yeah.
So this is a strange thing that people run into. They want it to be colorful, but they don't want it to look like it's on land, or they would shoot dry for wet, which sometimes they do increasingly. But then it's not underwater. It doesn't look like it's underwater. They don't have the weightlessness. They don't have that quality. So we have to make a lot of creative decisions about how much color to bring back into faces. Is it realistic? Sometimes it is. Sometimes it isn't. But the way light travels from above water to underwater is also something that we carefully control. So if a light source is coming from above water to underwater, it's going to pick up some characteristics of the curvature of the water if it's rippling. So if you think of a ripple in water as a lens, it's going to refract or diffract the light in a way that might intensify it or dissipate it, and that can be moving. So that can create, what they call acoustics, light patterns on the skin. So sometimes we want to have that because it speaks to us of an underwater effect, and sometimes we want to reduce it because we're cheating a set that's supposed to be super deep, so we shouldn't have any refractive surface patterns. So we have to soften the surface if we're using surface applied lights, or we have to use only underwater lights so that we don't have any risk of those refractive patterns giving away the fact that we're not deep. So there's almost too many considerations to talk about in a single
Right.
podcast,
Uh-huh.
honestly. But there are many, and it's a lot of fun for people who are interested in light. Some of the more fun experiences I've had on sets are with extremely seasoned DPs where he or she really wanted to learn about underwater light, explore underwater light, and they got to experiment with it and bring all of their knowledge and experience to working with me to find ways to push it and do things differently that have been done in the past in the water with light. And that is one of the most rewarding things I get to do is when I work with someone who really knows a lot about light in general, and then introduce them to some of the parameters and differences. And then it's really fun for them because some of them, as seasoned as they are, have sort of, I won't say done it all, but starting to get to a point where, oh, this is an interesting new challenge.
Yeah.
And to see them, operating like maybe they did when they were younger, and getting into like experimental joy of, experimenting again.
So what's a normal day for you as an underwater cinematographer? I mean, how long is the day? How much of that day do you actually spend in the water versus prep? Is there a standard day? I mean, I know there probably isn't, but just, generally speaking.
Well, to answer your question as to what is a standard work day in the water like, there isn't really a standard day because there's such a range of like how much of the water scene is underwater, how much of it is at water level, which may be a dialogue scene where people are talking while they're in the water, then they
Hmm.
have to go underwater and come back up. So maybe we're in the water a long time, but maybe not underwater a long time. But it does bring me back to some very big differences in that when you're working on a show that's a water story, meaning we're going to be underwater many hours, productions are not accustomed to having a lot of reduction in sort of work hours to get something accomplished. So in some cases, we're in the water for extraordinary amounts of time, in excess of 12 hours, maybe in the water, which is extreme, but it does happen. But whatever you can imagine a normal production day that ranges from 10 to, maybe slightly over 12 hours, we'll do the same thing, but in the water. And if the physicality of it is too rigorous, departments would sort of tap out and have teams that would replace other teams after a few hours. And I mean, some of my horror stories are where we had 12 hours of work every day, but there was one of me or one of my lead gaffer or somebody who really, there wasn't a replacement for in terms of the communication with the director and the production designer, whoever it was that was driving how the water had to look. And so we're doing our 12 hours and our grips are lighting, maybe some of them are doing the whole time and some of them are trading out. And those exceptionally long hours can actually be pretty taxing
Yeah.
on the body. I mean, I jokingly talk about sometimes on Avatar where some directors like James Cameron, he really does not want to break if he's on a roll and really getting what he wants to get. So we're like having energy bars thrown down into the tank, like, fish thrown to dolphins in an aquarium, but just to keep us going. And if anybody really was feeling compromised to the point of it being a safety concern or a health concern, we definitely would take those breaks as needed. We're never gonna put someone in harm's way like that just to get a shot. But we do pride ourselves in a certain level of preparation, which doesn't just include, preparing our lights and cameras. Anybody who works in the water would be kind of like akin to a Steadicam operator. You won't meet a Steadicam operator that doesn't train his or her body to be able to move that machine around all day long with the extra weight and the
Yeah.
need to be steady. Underwater teams are like that. When I'm not working and my team is not working, they are swimming laps in pools, they are training freediving, scuba, they're keeping sharp with their minds and bodies, both with the water skills and their bodies. So you would not be able to enter 8 to 12 hours a day in the water project if you had just been chilling for a few weeks.
Right. Now, we've talked about narrative films, documentaries, commercial stuff that you've worked on. Is there a specific genre of storytelling that you prefer, or are you happy doing all of them?
The short answer is I'm happy doing all of them because, I mean, all of the different methods of filmmaking that require underwater services are interesting to me. I have my roots in fascination with wildlife
Hmm.
and natural history filmmaking. So I always enjoy and I love animals, and I am constant advocate for water quality issues that face all marine and aquatic wildlife. So I always cherish an opportunity to be working in the real natural environments where I might encounter or witness something extraordinary with wildlife. But I also really enjoy collaborating with people to make art and to push the limits of artificial light and camera movement and trying to do something extraordinary and inspirational for helping people tell their stories, which aren't necessarily connected to the natural world. There could be a science fiction, it could be we sometimes we film water. It's not, we're not even supposed to be in the water. They just wanted to use water as a strange medium to communicate a psychological moment of weightlessness. So there's a whole range of types of filming, and I've even gotten excited tagging along with news crews to capture something extraordinary, like we have going on now with massive coral bleaching due to high temperatures.
Hmm.
Anything that challenges me to try and get the best shot possible, moving a camera and adjusting light in the water is interesting to me.
And now you talked about your natural history stuff, but did I read right that you have also done some stuff with Shark Week?
Yeah.
Talk about
Well,
that.
I mentioned to you earlier in our talk that the sort of genesis of my ability to be a underwater professional was working on and making shark films. I probably worked on 30 different shark stories in some capacity in the very first part of my career. So I had a lot of shark material, and if you work with sharks long enough, you even have a few hazardous moments. And I did work on some hour-long shark specials about specific shark species, bull sharks, and I did a shark film for Disney. But for Shark Week, I did some work just as an underwater cameraman to capture some shark natural behavior, and I also had the unfortunate experience to be rolling when someone was badly bitten by a shark.
Mm.
So when that happened, because there's only so many real shark bites captured on film, that Shark Week for a few years was running that moment in some stories about shark attacks.
Now, I suspect geography has a lot to do with how your job is impacted. I suspect the water in Florida is different than other parts of the world. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so anytime, especially now that most of my work is motion picture underwater scenes, where it's either a certain amount of it has to be in a real ocean environment, and then a created ocean, or otherwise in a underwater environment in a set. And so a lot of times I'm consulted about where the shots should be done, not just the scene, but individual shots. Maybe is a better shot in a different location. So I live in South Florida. It's not a bad place for shooting in the water, but the water quality is very subject to weather conditions.
Hmm.
So, like Florida Keys can have really beautiful clear water, but can also turn into a murky mess from storms. I'm pretty close to the Bahamas, and because the Bahamas are sort of positioned out in the Atlantic Ocean, there's usually a way to find clear water in the Bahamas, even with strong winds. So a lot of the work that I might do in Florida, we move out to the Bahamas because it's more reliably clear water. When I'm working in California, I have pretty good water quality out towards the Channel Islands, albeit a little bit colder. So if you have a scene that the person isn't supposed to have a wetsuit on, does create some problems. So how warm and clear the water is can definitely play a role in projects that require long hours of people in normal wardrobe that doesn't involve wetsuits. So we like to have close-ups and things that require people to feeling, really of sound mind and body so that they can act. We like to have control over the water quality. So tanks, are usually heated up to, I don't know, in the vicinity of 90 degrees, which sounds quite warm. But for people that are basically in clothes, or children or people who might have body types that don't have a lot of insulation, or someone who just has to sit still and can't generate body heat, we really need that warm water to keep them acting, not surviving.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of controlling our sets and how well they're going to function. Now, in the ocean, there's no substitute if you have an ocean story for the way real sunlight passes through ocean surfaces and ocean water quality. So sometimes you have a scene where we want to be 80 feet down looking up at a life raft with lights streaming around it. For a movie I worked on called All Is Lost, we had a man surviving in a life raft and slowly being, sort of consumed by the sea. And we went to a spot where we could get 80 feet under and have real sharks passing by silhouetted against the sun shafts streaming down through the water column to sort of give us a feeling of, the ocean itself as a god, if you will, sort of looking up at our man in the raft. And then we actually left a raft in the water for a month and a half on location. We sent a raft ahead before we got there so that the raft would accumulate the kind of growth that would occur in the real ocean. It had algae and the beginnings of soft corals and things growing on it, and had like a little hint of an ecosystem forming under it, which was remarkable because it lent itself to fish being attracted to it. And then we ended up with a school of fish under the raft, and then larger fish. The directive I had from J.C. Chandor, the director, was I wanted him to sort of, the food chain to be sort of his entering the food chain. And we wanted to sort of see the food chain represented in going sort of up the food chain, so to speak, on camera. And we were able to achieve that with those methods. And we would never have been able to do that in a tank.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great story. This is such a great niche part of the industry. What advice do you have people that may be interested in going this direction?
Usually it's someone who is exploring photography and then gets interested in underwater photography, and then from that they have to develop themselves as a diver. Or you have a diver that's also a photographer and became a filmmaker. A lot of those people actually seem to approach people like myself who have a few movie credits because they're trying to figure out, how do I do this for a living? And it's difficult because when I started, I think the path was a little bit different because we had to figure out how to like run film through a camera.
Yeah.
And the economics of that were very complicated. Like, because now you could like put your GoPro or your iPhone underwater and make an incredibly theatrically releasable image,
Yeah.
like just in terms of resolution and quality. And so the barrier for entry just to learn how to do underwater cinematography is very low financially speaking. So now it's, what do you do to develop yourself as a storyteller? What stories do you want to tell? How do you develop yourself as an accomplished filmmaker? When I say storyteller, I mean, do you know how to get the range of shots required to make the scene that you imagine, the close-ups, the moves, the light? So, my advice to people trying to get into it is, first and foremost, be safe in the water, because there's a lot of ways to hurt yourself with a camera in your hand that aren't as dangerous without a camera in your hand.
Right.
So learn how to be a great diver, and realize that swimming with a camera offers some additional risk, because if you're a really good camera person and you're looking at your frame and you're really good at like swimming, but maybe don't remember that while you're swimming up and you're not exhaling, or you're swimming up too fast. So there's a lot to learn about swimming with a camera so that you don't violate any of your dive principles. So that's like the first thing I would like to remind people, because it is actually a little bit dangerous, but not once you're good at those things.
Yeah.
So develop your dive skills, go out in the water. But in terms of entering the business as a professional, I personally feel like I got a lot of value with the sort of mentorship way of approaching things. I had people who I was fortunate enough to work with that I admired and learned from. And I had a film professor from my school that I got to shoot with and learn a lot about story and experimenting, with imagery. And then I had professionals like my friend Bob Talbot. And then I still to have mentors. I mean, every director that I admire their work, Jim Cameron, Danny Boyle, Anthony Dodd Mantle, Derek Walsky, Gore Verbinski, like any, Tony Scott back in the day. So many people I've been exposed to that I was a sponge around them. And like anytime I was around someone whose work I admired, I try to learn as much as I can. And I think that still applies today, even though I think the ways to become a professional, like people now, younger people who are working through social media, you have a platform right away to show your films. I don't know how to speak to that so much because I'm still part of a generation that I'm working on these television series and motion pictures, but the next generation will be the Justin Biebers of the motion picture world, the people who were discovered because they did something online. I really don't know the answer to
Yeah.
what is now, because I have to assume that people going around with their phones and making films are going to turn into great storytellers.
Yeah.
I don't know if film school, I don't know if any of those things are the same as they were. It's hard for me to say.
Yeah. We've mentioned safety a few times, but I wanted to ask you a specific question. I mean, certainly I don't want you to name any names here, but uh, like having the respect for the safety aspect of what you guys do is obviously paramount. Have you had any experiences in your career where people, directors, producers didn't necessarily respect the safety need, and you had to kind of push back to say, wait, like what you're asking is a little dangerous, or you're putting us in bad positions? Do you ever have that?
It's an interesting question, and I think I'm sure you get a lot of diplomatic answers, because I'm sure I'm not the first person you've asked, are film sets safe? Do people ask you to do unsafe things? I don't think anyone who's been in the business for an excess of 10 years or, maybe multiple decades as I have, where you haven't seen that. And I would like to say that I see less of it, and I probably could say that, but I still see it. I
Hmm.
mean, but I want to answer the question a little bit differently. So the answer is yes, there are unsafe situations, but we are every so often reminded, seeing something that's heading towards being unsafe, and we have a little huddle with our crew, our team, and we say, let's remind ourselves that although everyone in other departments are respectful, that let's treat it as though maybe this setup they've created might be trying to kill us. Because there are things that can go wrong, even in the best laid plans.
Right.
There are failures, there are things suspended above tanks that have failures. There are failures in communication, where someone said there would be a safety measure in place, and lo and behold, it's not in place when you arrive. Or when I say arrive, I mean you're underwater and something isn't there that you checked out that was there before,
Yeah.
that helps you with safety. So, it's very complicated what you're talking about, because there's no world where they want to do an action scene that it's 100% safe.
Right.
I was on a film not too long ago where a boat had to roll over, and they had a rig to roll the boat over, a real boat with real stunt guys on it. And, there's no faking a person escaping a rollover boat. You're hiring ex-professional athletes. In this case, we had an ex-Navy SEAL, we had a current professional football player, and we had an ex-Olympic swimmer turned a water stunt professional.
Hmm.
They were tasked with jumping off a boat while it's rolling over. If they didn't jump off it in time, they would land and smash on a hard part of the boat, because they'd be landing on the boat, not the water.
Right.
If they didn't get out of the way in time, the boat would land on top of them. So there's a certain amount of accepted risk. And then as an underwater camera person, I frequently end up in that sort of stunt world. And there are a couple of stunt directors who actually hire me on their SAG contract so that I'll get the benefits of some additional respect that SAG gets than maybe other unions get for safety measures that need to be put in place. So risk is measured in statistics, I would say. We're not without risk.
Yeah, but I hope, again, I'm not a trained underwater cinematographer. I would hope that some of the risk and some of the dangerous situation is just because of the people that aren't in your position don't understand the risks that they're asking you guys to take. Not necessarily that they're purposely putting you in dangerous situations, just that they don't understand the risk that they put you guys in sometimes.
I think that there is some danger and risk on film sets underwater because some of the people making decisions are not as experienced as the people in the water. But we are definitely tasked with making sure we have people who have the final say in how things are done that are experienced in water. We rarely, probably never, allow ourselves to be exposed to effects rigs that aren't reviewed by a dive safety officer.
Good. Where can people learn more about you or the profession? What do you have to plug here?
I am not particularly well, I am not at all self-promotional. So you're asking for me to offer you some easy method to promote myself. I have a Instagram account, Pete Zook, Petezuc, but it's not a professional account. It's a personal account. It's not private. I just post, musings of things I see, in my private life that I'm willing to make public, and things I saw underwater, a sea creature, things on sets that are amusing, but I'm like any professional now. I don't take any risks posting something from a set that I have signed a non-disclosure agreement to not expose. So I'm not that generous of a resource to learn on my social media because I feel so encumbered by non-disclosure agreements that I just don't take any. I've had a couple of hand slappings over the years for thinking I could talk about something or post something. So even for this podcast, I reached out to John Landau to make sure I was okay to answer your specific questions.
Yep, yep.
I don't mess around with that. I really, maybe it's like what is it? Loose lips sink ships. So so no, if someone wants to see me personally, they could look at my Instagram account, or my ex Twitter account, which I'm just starting to open up now.
Well, and people can certainly see what you have done and what you're in the process of doing on your IMDb account, which we'll link to in the notes of this session. So
I'll plug a couple of films that are coming out though that
please.
I've worked on. The Sphere Las Vegas Theater, the largest, I think it's touting itself as the largest theatrical motion picture screen on the planet inside a spherical venue. I worked on a film for Darren Aronofsky called Postcard from Earth, which is a combination natural history sci-fi film. That's going to be the opening film in that venue. It's going to be running for a while though, 2023 and into 2024. And then I worked on a film called Naiad about the ocean swimmer Diana Naiad, who swam from Cuba to Florida.
Yeah.
That was with director Chai Vassarelli and Jimmy Chin, and director of photography, reunited with Claudia Miranda, who I worked with extensively on Life of Pi. And this was another water story we got to work on together, which was a nice experience for both of us. So those are two things coming out.
Excellent. Well, Pete, we really appreciate you spending time with us and sharing such great stories. Thanks so much for being on the Film Florida podcast.
You're welcome. Nice to talk with you again, John.
Thanks for listening to the Film Florida podcast. For more information about Film Florida, go to filmflorida.org and like or follow our social media pages. If you're not already a member of Film Florida, please consider joining at filmflorida.org. If you like what you hear on the podcast, please consider going to our website and donating $20.23 for our 2023 fundraising campaign. Check out Film Florida merchandise at filmflorida.creator-spring.com, and please remember to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast.